attacks on the 2020 election. Hope I didn't scare you. Hi, I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you into episode 195 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. Today's show may hurt your head. I know it's doing a number on mine. With the 2020 election a little over 2 months away, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November is under attack. Who's doing it? Why? And what can we do to stop it? Nick Leone joins us to talk it over on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. Everybody knows that foreign actors and some foreign governments are trying to hack the next U.S. election. I say everybody knows that, though there are people out there just as certain that no, there aren't foreign actors and some foreign governments trying to hack the next U.S. election. That divide may be seen as evidence that foreign actors and some foreign governments have succeeded in hacking the next election, and we're still 2.5 months away from Election Day. Nick Leone writes for SecureMac. He's been looking into this issue, and he joins us to tell us more. Nick, thank you very much for being here again this week.
Glad to be here.
Let's talk first about what you're working from for the information we're bringing today.
Sure. The Black Hat USA Security Conference was held a couple of weeks ago, and this year it was all remote due to COVID-19. And one of the two keynote talks at the conference was called Hacking Public Opinion, and it was all about this topic, like how countries conduct their information operations online. The speaker who gave the talk was Renee DiResta. She's research manager at Stanford Internet Observatory, which is like this interdisciplinary institute at Stanford that focuses on how tech gets misused, especially social media. And she specializes in studying how narratives spread on social media. In addition to that, she's like a contributor at Wired, at The Atlantic, Mozilla Fellow in Media, Misinformation, and Trust, a presidential leadership scholar, so among many other qualifications.
She sounds smart.
Yeah, she's real smart.
All right, so that's who she is. Now, who are the bad guys? And let's go a little bit into what their goals are as well.
In her talk, DiResta focused on two major foreign powers, Russia and China. And obviously, when we're saying the bad guys here, we're not talking about the countries themselves. We're not talking about certainly the people living there. But we're talking about very specific groups within the military and within the intelligence communities of those countries, their information operations divisions. So in terms of like what the goals are, in broad terms, there are four main possible goals that any information operation can have. And those are distract, persuade, entrench, divide. So real quick, one by one, what those are. Distraction, exactly what it sounds like. If your target audience is focused on something that your country is doing, you want them to look elsewhere. You want to try and get them to pay attention to something else. Persuasion, also pretty straightforward, basically just trying to get people to believe something or to feel a certain way. Then there's entrenchment, and I found this one kind of interesting. It's where you're basically trying to foster groups that have really strong group identities. And you're trying to get people to become really strongly identified with like a social or a political, ideological group identity. And then the last one, divide, that's how you exploit that. So when you have these strongly entrenched groups in a society, you can then run information operations designed to pit them against each other. And the goal is to take these pre-existing group divisions that now you've fostered and amplified, and then use them to create division, create chaos, or just build general animosity within a society.
Okay, so are both China and Russia running all four of these schemes or all four of these operation types?
It doesn't look like it. Like China basically is looking to persuade. More than anything else, they're interested in telling China's story well. That's how people who study the situation put it. And so the basic goal is just to show China in a positive light, to persuade people around the world, people outside of China, that China's growing power is like a good thing for the world, right? That China is a good thing for the world. And it's also to downplay or deflect any criticism of China. Russia, on the other hand, they don't seem to be focused on persuading anyone about anything, right? So their main focus is going to be to create divisions in the society of whoever they see as an adversary. And that would certainly include the US. And the way they do this is they create content that's specifically designed to appeal to those different subsegments of American society in a way that deepens people's existing social and political identities, and then to use those entrenched identities to create further division between different parts of American society. And, I think it's actually right here, it's important to touch on like the why of it as well. So look, basically some countries see the US as an adversary, as a competitor, right? And what kind of competition would you rather have? One with a strong, unified country where people feel a bond of community with one another, or one where the country is sort of tearing itself apart?
All right, so first segment, we covered the basic idea of who is up to what, with a little bit of why as well. Let's go ahead now and dive into the how, like how these things are happening.
Yeah, and the how is really interesting. One thing Duresta really stressed was how these influence campaigns are really what she called full spectrum operations. So in the case of both China and Russia, they aren't like just creating fake social media accounts. They're also figuring out how to abuse the algorithms that are used by social media platforms to get their own content boosted. They're building their own media organizations, right, which are basically just government mouthpieces that they can then use to create misleading content that they can use in their information operations. And like some of them, there's differences between those organizations. Like some of them are really easy to spot. If you see a news story from like the People's Daily newspaper, right, you can tell it's coming from a paper that's just straight up run by the Chinese Communist Party. But then they're also using content sources that are a lot harder to attribute. So, for example, China will use these content farms that they kind of look like news organizations, but they're also a little bit suspicious when you look at them. Like they're always pushing the exact same narrative as, for example, the Chinese government, or they always seem to be running some negative story about like a politician or a country that China's not happy with at the moment, right? But then it's not immediately clear that there's a direct connection to the government. So on paper, they're an independent organization. But then if you do a little bit of research, maybe you find out that, say, the website owners do have some, connection to the government, some family connection or something like that. And then they're also using content sources that are just completely fake, like made up news organizations that don't exist anywhere but on Twitter. And they're also creating active misdirection or disinformation sites. Duresta gave what I thought was one kind of scary example of something Russia did. There was a site called Black Matters US, which was supposedly run by Black Lives Matter activists in America. But then when they looked into it, it turned out it was actually run by the Internet Research Agency, which is this Russian troll farm that has ties to Russian military intelligence.
That reminds me of, I think around the last election, there was a story. And here's the problem. I don't want to tell the story because I can't cite the source. But I remember hearing about one that was like basically just, it was some sort of demonstration for one, quote, side, end quote. And it really got other people from the other, quote, side, end quote, angry. And so these two like warring groups showed up. And the thing is, there was actually no protest. Like there was no organization to the whole thing. It was just, if memory serves, it was an ad that was like, oh, there's going to be this thing. And people got up in arms, thankfully not literally, but people got up in arms and then came out. And, it was basically just to get people who were PO'd at each other, there to fight with each other. Yeah. But I could be making that up. Sorry. I'm not making it up. I know I saw the report. I can't remember where, so I apologize. Disregard all of that if you want to.
Well, I mean, so, they are creating all this kind of content. Some of it semi-legit or it kind of looks legit. Some of it is clearly fake or, like examples like the one you gave, right? And then you look at what they're actually doing with the content, right? So next step is to get it out on social media. And then they use all of the tools at their disposal, right? They'll use their fake accounts. They use what they've learned about how to game the feed algorithms on like Twitter or Facebook. They might even use the platform's legitimate native tools, like they could use Facebook ads to artificially boost their content on Facebook. And like the real hope is that they get actual people. This is kind of back to what you're talking about, actual people involved, right? Get actual people to start sharing this stuff organically. And then once that happens, so best case, from their point of view, is you get legit news organizations to start picking up their narrative, to start picking up their stories. And you get this kind of narrative, she called it a narrative laundering effect, right? Where, CNN or CNBC or whatever, now they're reporting on stories and as if they're actual news. And the real origin of these stories is, of course, some intelligence agency in Russia or in China.
And so both China and Russia are doing like all that?
They're both doing some of that, right? But again, their goals are different, so their tactics are going to be different as well. China, again, they're interested in persuading the world to see China in a positive light. And so what they'll do is they'll use things like language localized newspapers, which by that I mean like newspapers that aren't in Chinese, right? They're in English, they're in Spanish. And these news outlets they're like really, really big outlets. Like sometimes they have millions and millions of followers. Sometimes they'll even be on platforms that are like actually banned in China, for example, Facebook, right? So this is clearly stuff, it's not being written for domestic consumption, right? It's being produced for people outside of China. And they'll use these outlets to run stories about like I don't know how great China's response to COVID-19 was, right? Especially when they notice people, for example, in Europe or in the US starting to ask questions about, whether or not China should have been more forthcoming during the early days of the pandemic, right? They see that, and then suddenly you start seeing a lot of content praising China's response to COVID-19. And they're also getting more into like the social media troll thing. So, for example, during the Hong Kong protests at the end of last year, journalists who were reporting on the story in a light that would make China look kind of bad, or, even just normal people who are like tweeting, I don't know, like hashtag stand with Hong Kong or whatever, they start getting bombarded by comments and replies from these fake Twitter accounts saying, oh, no, you've got it all wrong. Like, I'm just a normal Hong Kong resident and everything's fine here. The police are doing a great job. You don't understand about the protesters. And again, you look into it and these accounts are like clearly fake accounts. And again, the end goal is to promote Beijing's narrative about who China is and to show them in the best possible light to the rest of the world. Russia, on the other hand, again, they're not all that interested in persuading people. So the name of the game for them is to get people in the US to strongly identify with some political group or some social group, some identity, to deepen those divisions and to set people against each other. And so they also will have these traditional media organizations like newspapers, news outlets like RT. But they also engage in a lot of this social media focused content, things like memes or like really shareable videos, stuff that has a pretty high likelihood of going viral. And it tends to be stuff that's more emotion based, right? It's more designed just to provoke a quick visceral reaction. It isn't something that you're going to sit down and read for 20 minutes and kind of think about rationally, right? And what was really, really interesting is that according to DiResta, they're doing this by creating content for both the political left and the political right in the US. Yeah. So, I mean, like, I'll give you one example. There's this organization, this video content production channel or whatever called In the Now. And they do video content that's aimed at like younger people, millennials, especially politically left-leaning millennials, right? 30 somethings who voted for Obama or whatever. And it's run by RT. It's run essentially by the Russian government, or at least funded by them, right? And if you go to their Facebook page, you'll see, you can see who it's aimed at, right? The tagline on the page is like, kindness is dope. And, the content is all stuff that would appeal to the sensibilities, to the ideological viewpoint of that particular demographic, right? But it's coming from RT. And, give another example, the Internet Research Agency, again, not officially a part of the Russian government, not on paper anyway. Technically, they're just contractors, but they do have ties to the GRU, to the Russian military intelligence unit. And people in the US intelligence community have said this. They've studied them for a while, and they've seen these connections, right? And the Internet Research Agency is really good at creating meme content that gets picked up by like huge numbers of people, hundreds of thousands of people sharing these memes. And if you look at the kind of content they produce, again, the focus is clearly on getting people to strongly identify with a political opinion, a viewpoint with a political identity. In other words, to entrench them in an identity, to get them to dig in and to deepen those divisions in American society.
All right. Here's my problem, though. Kindness is dope. I mean, kindness is dope, man. I mean, it's good to be good. I mean, being nice. I mean, this is Big Bird. This is Mr. Rogers. This is Jesus Christ. Okay. I mean, is it being nice that's being weaponized, or do you need a strong nice front so you can weaponize the let's be mean front? Or, I mean, does that answer even matter? I mean, is the real thing, as long as you've got us in an us versus them narrative, I was going to say you're good, but you're who you are. Yeah.
And the other thing that Russia does in particular is, keeping connected with those disconnected groups, right? Another big difference in terms of how Russia operates compared to China is that they're actually trying to develop relationships with their audiences. So they're basically trying to recruit people in the audience, obviously like unbeknownst to those people, into their information ops to get them to play an active role. And, maybe this goes back to what you were talking about earlier. I don't know. But, I mean, they investigate it. It even extends to sending people like DMs to offer them money or support to help spread the content, or even to actually go out and protest. And I guess the last thing about Russia is, there are groups within Russia, in particular within Russian military intelligence or associated with Russian military intelligence, that are, they're literally trying to hack public officials, not to hack public opinions, but to actually hack people, and then to take the results of what they hack and leak it out to the media. Using fake personas in a way that's hard to attribute to them, but they do this hack and leak stuff, and they also use the content that they steal basically to create social media content, things for memes, right? To kind of shift the conversation about a particular issue, or they'll just feed it to their own media organizations like RT, and then they can start reporting on whatever it was that was leaked. This is what you saw during the 2016 election with the hack of John Podesta's emails.
So the notes that you shared with me before the show seem to show China, really kind of faring poorly in its information wars against the U.S. Did I read that right?
Well, okay. I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily put it that bluntly, because in some areas, they actually do get pretty big audiences, right? The Facebook pages of those state-sponsored news outlets that are producing content in English, for example. But yeah, at least on Twitter, absolutely. Like in terms of getting engagement on fake posts, they don't appear to be doing that well at all. So, Twitter took down something like 23,000 fake accounts. And they handed the data set over to researchers, said hey, take a look at this, see if you can figure out what's going on. And when they studied those data sets, they found that something like 90% of those 23,000 fake accounts had fewer than 10 followers. So these were not exactly huge, prominent fake accounts, right? And all of the accounts together generated something like 350,000 tweets since around the beginning of 2020. But when you actually looked at the metrics, the engagement metrics, in terms of averages, in terms of how many of them were getting likes, favorites, retweets, some kind of engagement, average engagement per tweet was less than 1. So there were tons and tons and tons of these fake tweets that basically just got completely ignored by the Twitterverse.
All right. Well, okay. So on the Facebook side, then I apologize. China is a better bad guy than I thought. Overall, though, Russia, on the other hand, they seem to be better at being worse. Yeah.
I mean, I think Renee DeResta's her exact words were best in class at information operations. So they're kind of like the Cadillac of information warfare. And I mean, if you look at their engagement numbers, they do 10 times better than China, something like that.
So do we know why one does better than the other? I mean, did Resta offer thoughts as to why?
Yeah, I mean, she said that in the case of China, at least in that case study with Twitter accounts, with the removed Twitter accounts, right? It seemed like they kind of slapped together their fake Twitter accounts like almost on the fly, right? Like they were created kind of around exactly the same time. They had similar usernames, like blocks of similar usernames. They were using stock profile photos. They had a lot of the accounts had no bio or a super simple bio. And, so basically, if you looked at them, they weren't very convincing fake accounts. They didn't actually look like real people, and that might be part of why they just got ignored. In terms of why China in general isn't as good at getting engagement, it could honestly be that they're just getting started. So, and they're probably going to get better, right? So, I mean, if you think about it historically, like for years, China's propaganda efforts were pretty much focused domestically. They were inward looking, focused on domestic issues, domestic audiences. And so, as now they're starting to turn into this global superpower and starting to engage the rest of the world, they're going to take those capabilities and turn them outward. But that's a slightly different game, right? That's a new game for them, and that's one they're going to have to learn. Russia, on the other hand, if you look at how they operate, they seem to run these really careful, really targeted, well thought out disinformation campaigns or information operations. And they actually show a pretty deep understanding of the different groups or subgroups within whatever society they're targeting. And I think it kind of makes sense. This isn't necessarily something DeResta said, but I've just been thinking about it. I mean, if you think about it historically, like Russia's intelligence agencies now have their roots in the Soviet Union's intelligence agencies. And if you think of Russia sort of as building on all of those decades of outward-looking experience, propagandizing the West, say during the Cold War, well, it's not like they're just getting started doing this. They've been doing it for decades.
Believe it or not, there are things that we can do in the face of all of this. More of our conversation with Nick Leone in just a moment. But first, a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Chances are you're doing more with your computer today than you were just a few months ago, thanks to all the staying in and social distancing, working from home, learning from home. I'm not saying you're doing anything risky with your computer. I will say, though, now would be a horrible time for anything bad to happen to it. Okay, any time is a horrible time for something bad to happen to your computer, but if you're relying on it more now, yeah, you need a good anti-malware solution, like MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first, watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. Nick Leone is here with us today, talking to us about, well, all kinds of scary stuff. Broadly, we called it the attack on the 2020 election, but it, well, it's not just for this year. Heck, it's for every year. And so it's sort of, fighting it. One of the driving factors on this show, Nick, I'm sure you know, for the past several years, is giving people something to do. Yeah, not just listen. I mean, like a call to action. If you're worried about passwords, use a password manager. Make sure you're using not reusing passwords, stuff like that. Here's what to do if you're selling a computer. Here's what to do if you've been the victim of a data breach. And, I guess we're going to say, here's what to do if you think your election is being targeted by a couple of big countries. You've actually got a few ideas for fighting this. this, truly daunting situation. And let's just go over some of them. Top of your list, understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we've already done the first thing, right? You start by understanding why this is happening and how. So we talked earlier about the why, about what kind of competition other countries want the U.S. to be. They perceive it as easier for them if the U.S. is divided internally, if they're dealing with a country where like one half of the citizens don't trust the other half and vice versa, and neither half knows whether it can trust the results of an election. And DiResta says that's the bad guy's immediate goal, to take these divisions in U.S. society and amplify them, use them to further divide U.S. society, to make Americans lose confidence in the legitimacy of their elections. And I think once you know that, once you're aware that this is the goal and that these information operations are actually going on right now, then maybe you can start to engage with your own social media feeds a little bit differently.
So the next thing that we can all do is, you mentioned those social media feeds, really think about the stuff we're posting.
And take responsibility for the things that we share. So, I mean, this certainly goes for things like inaccurate stories or misinformation. Like you really need to be fact-checking yourself to make sure anything you share is actually coming from a reliable source, right? But I think it also means, if you see, say, some meme that seems intentionally provocative or constructed in such a way as to highlight a division in our society, to create an us versus them mentality, right? Even if you feel that it actually encapsulates your point of view, crazy as it sounds, understand that what you're sharing could actually be part of some foreign adversary's information operation and could actually be designed to entrench you in your political identity and to make you feel more divided from, the person who lives across the street from you. So before you share, before you retweet or whatever, ask yourself, is this helpful or is this divisive? And do I really know where it's coming from?
Okay, then there are things that we can do to, well, maybe not stop something from going viral, but, maybe slow its virility in a way. Yeah,
and you've already done the first thing by not reposting stuff without thinking about it first, Additionally, you can actually use the reporting tools on these social media platforms. So, Facebook has a report post button. Twitter has a report post button, report tweet button. And, they have options to flag things like, things that seem like disinformation, or to flag accounts that seem like they're bot accounts. And, I wouldn't let that kind of thing consume you. You don't want to spend all day doing that. And obviously you shouldn't go reporting stuff that you just don't agree with, or just stuff that you don't like. But if you see accounts that really truly do seem suspicious, or posts that seem like, honest to goodness disinformation, then say something, right? Help the social platforms keep tabs on that stuff and help them remove it. Because it's easy to think, oh, they don't care, they won't do anything. But look, Twitter removed all of those thousands of fake accounts, for example, just one example. So it can actually help them if the community is flagging suspicious activity.
And finally, and I think this one honestly could be the most difficult of all the ones that we've talked about, share this information with some of the people in your life.
Yeah, it is difficult, right? It is difficult because these are really kind of sensitive issues. But in terms of how to do it, I'd say first, make sure you do it in a way that's actually going to get people to listen, to engage with you, instead of like in a way that's going to make them defensive or get them to shut down, right? You don't want to like put your aunt on blast in her Facebook comments. I can't believe you were sharing Russian disinformation. How could you be so gullible? Like, that's not the way to do it. That's just going to bring these divisions that we talked about to the next family picnic, right? So instead, have offline conversations about what you've learned, about the mechanics of how these information operations work, about how these state actors amplify and exploit these fault lines in our society, with the intention of dividing us. And it's important to note that they do it by creating content for both the right and the left. It's an issue that affects, every part of the political spectrum. And, if you're not sure what to say, Or if you just want to reach more people in your network, right? Hey, share this podcast. If you have that coworker, that relative, that person you went to high school with 20 years ago, and you think they need to hear this, maybe just say, oh, hey, here's this thing I was listening to. I found it interesting, and maybe give it a listen.
You've heard him on the show before, and I know I mentioned it earlier. Nick writes for the SecureMac site. If you go to securemac.com/news, you can keep up with some of what he's keeping up with. You can also follow him on Twitter at Nick Leon Ruiz. That's NickLeonRuiz at Nick Leon Ruiz. And thanks again to Nick Leon for joining us today. If you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for all the shows that we've done, and you can listen to all of them right there as well. It all starts at one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.